And let me introduce my guests this morning to you. And my guest, Editor-in-Chief of the New Crusading Guide newspaper, Abdul Malik Kubako. Thank you for joining us. Dr. Michael Pesa-White, Research Fellow, Institute of African Studies, University of Ghana, former presidential staffer and former executive director of the National Service Secretariat. It's been a long time having you here.
Absolutely, I'm happy to be here.
Thank you for making the time. Also in the studio is Kofi Bento, Senior Vice President of Imani Africa. He's a lawyer. He's my friend, the rebel. Colonel Festus B. Abuaje is retired. Yes, he's a retired military officer. He's author, conflict analysis, and member council on foreign relations, Ghana. And anytime he comes here, I take the time to introduce his very good books to you. You don't have to be someone who has a peculiar interest in the security area to be reading some of these books. Indigenous African Warfare, Its Concepts and Art in the Gold Coast, Ashanti and the Northern Territories up to early 1900s. This is written by him and with a foreword by Professor A.B. Asenso. And ECOMOG, a sub-regional experience in conflict resolution, management and peacekeeping in Liberia. This is the second edition, and you'll be surprised. They are for nothing. They are for your yogurt change.
You might as well
Okay.
He sent it to me, autographed it to me. Yes.
Okay. The Ghana Army. Yeah. Okay. A coincides contemporary guide to its centennial regimental history, 1897 to 1999. Wow. Lieutenant Colonel Festus B. Abuaje, with a foreword from Major General N.A. Aferi, retired. Okay.
He doesn't remember.
Okay. So this is another book he personally autographed for Abdul Malik Kubako, who has brought it into the studio. So you can see it's very helpful.
When I saw his name on the list, I said, this is a reminder. And thanks, sir.
When he starts speaking, you see why it is good to be a student of life. Right. Gentlemen, good morning and welcome to Newsfile.
Thank you.
Good. Okay, so we have two segments. We do the first segment dealing with the crisis in Chereponi and also the matters in Krobo. And then we'll take a break, return with a second introduction of guests to have a discussion on the financial services sector. As you know, almost 400, over 300 financial institutions have, come down. Yesterday, their licenses were revoked. That adds to the 7 banks. Is that the end of it? Are we going to see more of that? Job losses? How much is the state going to continue to pump into this enterprise to keep the economy afloat because of the problems that these entities have faced? So we begin with Chereponi. And when people say it is a dispute over a small parcel of land, you ask, is this true? But when you check, you ask again, what else should a journalist do? Now, as we know, there have been a number of deaths. Many homes have been touched. The children there, women particularly, and children have become those who are bearing the brunt of what is going on. You must have heard pupils, students crying. They can't sit their exams because the sound of the gun is always heard. So we will bring to you what the Interior Minister has been saying about what must be done, including arrests. Mr. Dominic Nitiwo, who is the MP for the area, comes from the area and is the defense minister, what he also has to say, and the accusations that have been thrown at him. So let's take a listen to these pieces that we have for you before we come into the studio for the discussion.
I wonder why anybody will even make that kind of accusation. You know, clearly, this type of things, I've come here because I had to put all the opinion leaders from both sides to come and we'll resolve the matter. How can I fuel it? To gain what? If I cannot help the president, I shouldn't bring him down. It's an honor to give you a defense minister. It's once in a lifetime opportunity.
So why do you think people make these accusations and say you are complicit?
No, because I'm a concomber, guilty by accusation. I'm a concomber, so you must be guilty. That's it, nothing else. The man is guilty because he's a concomber man. So when Ashantis are fighting, Napo must be the one fueling it. Maybe when Achims are fighting, then it should be the president. That kind of thing doesn't make any meaning to me. But all the same, is the hazard of the job.
So no truth whatsoever in those accusations?
I ask you, what will I gain? For what? What am I going to gain? I should, if I want to do that, I should start from my own place. There are Chakwasi and Kongombes in my coincidence. Then I should start from there. Who do I know here? Who do I know? You shouldn't even ask me that question. Who do I know here?
In fact, it's sheer coincidence that I'm watching my own people before making a comment.
You know about the stories because they probably called you to tell you. But have you seen, in terms of your sister Gloria, have you seen her home?
Yeah, this is the first time I'm watching it. I've always been in Chereponi since the conflict erupted. But the last but one conflict that happened on the 16th of March 2019, I couldn't go. In fact, I was here in Accra with the DCE and then the regent of the place, because Chereponi has been carved out and is now part of the Northeast region. So the new regional minister, who is also a colleague member of parliament, was appointed, and we're here to, give him that moral support to go through the interview. So the following morning, we're to leave, and midnight we had the news that a community called Nawiako, somebody had been shot there. In fact, looking at the efforts we had put in place, and I just returned from Chereponi, I think 4 days later, then there was that incident. And I had lived in Chereponi for almost 2 weeks, going around every community. So in fact, it put me off and I went blackout. So
apologies that we're having to let you tell the story. That's the member of parliament for Chereponi for the first time, sharing the story of Chereponi to all of us. And I am sorry that you're having to relive this. Apologies. Really, really sorry.
We've been learning in our various houses more because this conflict has had so many effects on us. We've not been able to come to the school here to study along with our teachers. So we've been studying in our house alone.
How is it like when you have to study in the house? How is it like?
It's not all that effective because when we hear the gunshots around the neighboring villages, we are not able to learn like the way we used to do.
If you are learning and you hear the gunshot, you will not be able to learn like the way you used to do, and there will be fear in you. When we are in our various houses, we cannot do anything about it. So they should please stop the conflict, because this year the cut-off grade is grade 25, and as we are in the house, we cannot do anything. I'm crying because we are suffering. The government should do something about this conflict, because it is really affecting with the BC candidates, because the cut-off grade is grade 25. And
all right, so just a couple of excerpts there that you saw. Very, very terrible. And the MP, he was seeing for the first time, and JoyNews had been to the place. Gifty Ando Apia, head of our security desk, was there, and she brought the pictures and brought the stories closer to us, you know. And they put up these pictures, played some of the interviews, and the MP saw that his family were in there for the first time. That's how you saw him breaking down on the set. Okay, so let's start with Colonel. and it's deliberate. I won't start with Kofi because he's in a bad mood. I can see that he's tearing. What is happening? How do you understand what is going on? What can be done? It's become a ritual.
More than a ritual. In fact, it is evidence of how, as a society, we tend to turn blind eye to the obvious, if I should put it that way. This conflict, in classical conflict analysis paradigm, is a protracted social conflict. It has its roots in the history of the different peoples in the region. It might have come to the fore with the collapse of the Ashanti Kingdom and the decay of Ashanti.
Okay, we're having a little hitch with your microphone, so just hold on briefly. We'll return to you, and let me get to Kofi. And when we played the girls who were speaking, yeah, we need the kernel first. Can you fix the microphone? Can you fix that microphone? Okay, let's hear Ambrose Derry, the Interior Minister, about this. We'll be right back.
Last time, the Defense Minister decided to go and take up the matter locally because he belongs to one of the ethnic groups, and both sides, political divide, ethnic divide, religious divide, they went to talk to the people, which is a way of trying to get consensus so that peace would be sustainable. But on our part, we are enforcing the law. And you've heard that so far 2 people have been convicted and sentenced to 5 years imprisonment. It has never happened. Anytime we have these things, we go and then we arrest people. We never prosecute them. We prosecuted them. And there are other people now who are still in remand. And the law is going to take its course. So there are many ways of approaching it. Under the auspices of the Ministry of the Interior, we have the National Peace Council doing its work, as always, as is doing between the major parties about vigilantism. But we want to let the country know that we will not allow anybody to take the law into his own hands and hold this nation to ransom.
I would like to also make an appeal to our brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers in Chereponi. Chereponi, you know, there have been some disturbances there recently. There is we are all one. We are really all one. Whether you are Konkomba, Mamprusi, Chokosi, we are one people. Our only enemy is poverty. Let us fight poverty, but let us not fight each other. That is what I would like to tell our brothers and sisters. Ghana is big enough for all of us. All of us. And let us respect each other, let us work together, and let us beat poverty together.
Right, so kind of we're listening to you. If you can start where you...
Yeah, so sorry for the technical hitch. My main observation about the conflict is that we're tending to be short-sighted. We're tending to look at the conflict as if it is a phenomenon that started 2 years, 3 years, 5 years ago, but it's deeply rooted in our history. And I was trying to suggest that it has something to do with the collapse of the Ashanti Kingdom. There are records that make reference to an escalation way back 1917. Just towards the end of the First World War. There was another escalation, the so-called Cow War, 1940. There was another escalation, the Fish War, 1946. Then the Yam War, 1981-83, which is more contemporary. Then the Guinea Fowl War, just about a decade later, 1994, and that was the first time that you had a record of the military intervention by, if you like, the modern armed forces. Now, when you hear all of these nomenclatures, you might think that, it's a conflict about a piece of land, it's a conflict about haggling over a guinea fowl, it's a conflict about somebody buying yam or whatever it is. But it's more serious than that. And I would want to contextualize the conflict in the broader Kokomba-Nanumba conflict. And by this I mean the Kokomba Compact, as you know better than I do, for instance, with the Nauris. Then the Nanumba Compact, as you would also know, with the Dagbon and the Gonjes. I think we need to situate the conflict in the broader conflict between these two ethnic groups. There's also a bit of worry about the timing as we speak, because we have more existential threats to the security of the country. And now we need to invest security resources into the conflict, as it were, divert the focus or the effort. The locale itself, as you would know, is also troublesome because it's close to the source of the threat that I'm referring to. Then there is a sense, I stand to be corrected, about how we have tended to manage the conflict, i.e. by tending to deconflict or de-escalate. And the minimalist approach that is characteristic of many societies, that you go in with a smaller force, it's not able to deliver, then you increase the force, and all along it gets out of hand. Meanwhile, over the decades, if not centuries, we have never made a concerted, concrete attempt to address the root causes. The root causes, largely, are about identity. They are about ancient hatreds. And you will see it clearly that if you buy a guinea fowl, and I come and tell you, by you, Kokomba, do you have money to buy a guinea fowl? And that is enough to cause a conflagration. That statement has a meaning that can only be explained in history. And we're not dealing with that. The call for cessation of hostilities, the call for ceasefire, they're all fine. But they're not going to work. And the episodes that I've narrated clearly point to the fact that if indeed we want peace and stability for the entire country, we need at this time to take this conflict a bit more seriously. And not only plaster over it, do the humanitarian side, which may not even be sufficient. We've not even talked about how well the security forces are resourced to be able to deliver, whether they are in the right numbers and so on and so forth. So these are my initial thoughts about the conflict. I have other perspectives that I think I can share when my colleagues have had the opportunity to.
One other concern that people would like to appreciate or understand is how does it happen that in these poverty-stricken homes, almost every household has guns? How is that explainable?
Well, I've had the occasion to suggest that cultural identity is, I don't know how to explain it. It's so important that you cannot put a cost to it. So this conflict is about identity. And you go to any extent to be, to try to protect, to secure that identity.
Because they have guns, it is easy to fall for the temptation to want to react to a provocation and to begin to kill each other.
That may also not be very realistic. Indeed, the worst war, or the worst of them, probably the 1941, the Cow one, whatever it was, plus the 1994 one, especially the Cow one, they were fought with bows and arrows, and cudgels and daggers. And yet, over 1,000 casualties occurred. 411 villages were destroyed, and over 1,500 were displaced. So like the Rwandan genocide, the proliferation of small arms and light weapons have a role to play in the intensity of the conflict. But nevertheless, conflict do occur, even in the absence of some of these lethal weapons. So yes, we need to try to deal with that, and that's one of the points that I'll try and make later. But I don't think they are the reasons why the conflict is occurring.
How do we know how they get the guns?
Well, I think there is empirical evidence. First of all, this question must be thrown to the National Commission on Small Arms and Light Weapons, because that was why they were established. We should also ask the National Peace Council, which also must explain how the dynamics of the conflict revolve around small arms and light weapons. But empirically, given the porosity of our borders that many people talk about, given our proximity to neighbors who have been so unstable for decades, and given the affinity between weapons and other transnational organized crime, the weapons are not very easy to find. Then, of course, we shouldn't forget that in this country, it is documented, by DICAF, by Kofi Annan, by other centers of excellence, that the expertise, technological expertise of blacksmiths in this country come very close to those lethal weapons like AK-47s that are imported. They have so perfected their expertise that they can give you any weapon under the sun by doing reverse engineering. And indeed, when I read, or I'm aware that this is the case, when we read about the importation of these arms, ammunition, and cartridges and so on, the descriptions of some of them suggest that you could easily take the trigger mechanism and you can then blacksmith your way and have a full gun, So the weapons are available. And the reason why we have not been able to rein them in is because of institutional decay. That the institutions that have been set up, starting from the National Commission for Small Arms and Light Weapons and so on, plus the CID, plus all the other agencies, are not able, have never been able to try and recover illegal weapons from the society. And they are getting out of hand.
The Commission is very worried, and they have statistics showing that the increase in criminal activity, particularly armed robberies. In 2016, we had 1,300 plus. In 2017, we had 1,700 plus, almost 1,800 plus. And they say that a baseline study in 2003 disclosed that 240,000 firearms were in the hands of civilian adults in this country. More than a decade later, in 2014, another baseline study by the Ghana National Commission of Small Arms revealed 2.3 million arms are in the hands of adult civilians in Ghana, indicating over 850% increase in the number of firearms in circulation in Ghana. Today, the actual number of firearms circulating in Ghana could be more due to the continuous influx of firearms into this country. How do we allow? We have a system that's supposed to check, and they seem to suggest that the arms are in wrong hands, really. How does it happen?
See, the state, and I think Kofi and my other colleagues can speak a bit better about this. The state has a primary responsibility to protect human beings within its territorial borders. Where the state is not able to, is not willing to, may not be interested in providing security for the individual will find ways and means of providing his or her own security.
Only 53% of these arms, 2.3 million, are registered.
Yes.
The rest is unaccounted.
Yes. So those who know that ordinarily, they might not have even the time, and they might not even have the benefit of being vetted positively by the CID, for instance, would want to go some other ways, to find these weapons. Then you know that in the conflict areas, and indeed we normally talk about Alavanyo and so on. Alavanyo is not the only locale in this country where arms are manufactured. all around the country, in Ashanti, in the western region, in the northern region, and elsewhere. These arms are being manufactured. Then, of course, where there is a market, and that is why I think Dr. Kwesi has been emphasizing this idea is, who are the entrepreneurs? Because there is a market, there will be suppliers. And the suppliers will use all other means, legal, illegal, to bring the weapons in. Then, of course, you may have a corrupt security institutions who may take the bribes and then let these items go through. And I've had occasion to mention that in spite of all that we're saying, that the motorbike has become a platform of choice for crime. Yet we are now seeing a regime where stop and search has become the norm. That everywhere, every motorbiker is being stopped, is being searched. And therefore we've created the environment where virtually the authority of the state is non-existent. Although there might be a police officer or any other reasonable citizen present at a crime scene, the state is not there.
Okay, we'll return to ask what you think are the most lasting solutions so that we will not hear that there is this recurring situation in Chereponi again. But Kofi, and I like you to look at it from a perspective where I saw you were really hit when the girls were talking to Gifty and they were weeping. I just saw you and I could tell how you felt about that.
Yeah. So actually that is the heart of the issue. And everything is important with some of these things. But when you get it to that granular level, and look, a lot of what the girls were saying is important. That girl has calculated down to the cutoff point. She understands her education is her only way out of poverty. She has been able to connect that to the conflict. She is weeping because that conflict, if it goes on for the next 2 months, may sentence her to a life of poverty. That is because somebody has not done their job. And you can keep connecting it. That is the whole point. You see? And yeah, you could read me well because
hundreds are displaced.
Yeah.
They have just been fleeing.
Yeah.
Because in fact, their homes are touched and they have nothing to do.
And I'm happy Colonel is here to give the historical, basis and the expert views, because that is what I will base what I have to say on. He talked about the fact that you can trace all the way back to the collapse of the Ashanti Kingdom. All societies evolve. They are in flux. In Europe, they had the Ottoman Empire. When it went out, you had a number of states. You had the Second World War, creating a certain new arrangement. And it's true across societies. What happens is that when you have these traditional societies, nebulize, they break up and that kind of thing, then you have nation states rising up, which is why we got the state called Ghana, which is essentially, Prof. Kumado will tell you, it's 4 countries made together. The point I want to make is this. The state, therefore, has to move in and fill those gaps left by the Ashanti Kingdom. And the issue, the history he's reading tells us that we have failed to do that for 100 years. That's the first point I want to make. I'm a policy analyst. I'm not a security expert. But the first thing you learn in policy analysis is that security is the foremost and the first purpose of government. If they don't get that right, no policy analysis is necessary. No pursuit is worthwhile. Okay? And to that extent, therefore, we say the state should stop everything and secure people and property. Here is a situation where the state is clearly failing and has failed for 100 years. Chief was saying something, and I think that's where we should be going with all this analysis. It's not about the preaching. What are we going to do now to make sure this doesn't happen again? It is not possible for anybody to tell me that we cannot contain what is happening in Chereponi.
Is the state failing or it's overwhelmed? The state has just come out of a very successful landmark resolution of a conflict that we didn't think was going to end.
Because
the Dagbon situation.
Because we gave it the necessary focus. So that's the next point I want to say. Is it that we can't do it? Are we overwhelmed? I doubt it. Because I don't think Chereponi is beyond us. See, somebody said something very interesting. Recently there was a problem I think in one of the malls, and somebody came and said he's national security or something. And the person made a point. He said, there are more national security people in our malls in Accra than in Chereponi. He may not have had any basis for it, but there's a point there. The point is, how much of our national security resources have we committed to these protracted, age-old conflicts which we don't seem to care about? Now, it is important we care about these things.
They are in lecture halls.
That's the problem.
What some lecturers have to say.
That is the problem. How we may not be giving it the attention we need, and that is why the problem is. You see, when you have these conflicts, the security people will tell you that other people take advantage of it. Okay? After the Second World War, when the US realized that the Soviet Union was advancing and they felt threatened, they went to their enemies, to the Germans. In fact, US rocket science was given them by German technology. Point I want to make is this: when you feel threatened, you even go to your enemy for support. When you have these kinds of situations happening in those places, then you'll find people taking all kinds of advantage of it. Here's what I think we should do going forward on this. Whenever there is a conflict like this which erupts, the cabinet of this country, dear President and your ministers, should insist on a full brief. Maybe they do it, but my point is this: there must be a total check of everything that was done to prevent it, and an analysis of why it could not be prevented. Because I don't think this is the most complex thing. We've done Dago. It took a number of years.
I hear you say this is a clear case of failure in intelligence, and that the intelligence organizations are failing this country?
That's the point.
And you seem to also be supporting what Colonel Festus Abuaji spoke about as to the piecemeal, attack, as it were, approach.
Yes.
We take 2 or 3 officers there, we check if it's not working, then we add. When we should take an approach that goes there and stops
in it. Exactly. The point I've made is that we need to use our national intelligence resources better. This is a failure of intelligence. Okay? We need to make sure we can deploy the national defense resources strategically to prevent these things and to contain them quickly. Like I said, I'm not a security analyst, but I don't think this is beyond us. The problem is we are not taking it seriously enough. And then you have all these situations and they flow into all kinds of, other, effects. You talk about the armed robberies. These things are serious. And it's sad that we've sat down this long. Somebody should be giving us information about, look, journalists know the flashpoints in this country. And because I was going to say something, but I'll just say, when these things are about to happen, they don't happen suddenly. Look, nurses leave for weeks and months. People know it's about to happen. So I don't know what it is that we have hundreds, I hear thousands of national security people. And like my friend said, there are more of them loitering in the malls in Accra than you have in Chereponi. We do have, the resources. We should be using them better, and we should not accept these failures. The BNI director or whoever is in charge of our national security should be answering very, very serious questions anytime these eruptions happen. And think about those girls. Never forget them.
Interesting. Dr. White, Pesa White, as you say, Pesa White.
That's right.
Okay, right, thank you. There are those who say, like they just identified, you have a BNI, which is supposed to be your foremost intelligence gathering institution, together with the national security, so to speak. But they are here in Accra chasing, petty quarrels with political opponents, arresting, very frivolous issues and focusing on these matters when they should be doing the job of intelligence gathering. Who is failing us in this regard, as far as Chereponi is concerned?
Thank you very much, and good morning to our listeners and viewers. Let me also use the occasion to express my deepest condolences to the families that have lost very loved ones in this rather very unfortunate conflicts in Chereponi. To start with, I think that this conflict is a scar on our efforts at nation building. And let me also continue by saying that it is probably one of the cancers that might eventually lead to this nation experiencing some of the most horrible times. Not that I wish it, but it appears that the reoccurrence of this over and over and over and again may blow up in our face at some point in time. Yes, it is true. It is identity politics, and it is identity politics largely because prior to what we call Ghana, there were many ethnic nations. I don't like using the word tribe. It is very derogatory. So, I mean, there were many ethnic nations. These ethnic nations were involved in some forms of migration, warfare, and so on and so forth. We all don't know where it would have led to. But based on the history of maybe Western Europe, eventually, stronger nations would have emerged out of it and would have had bigger stability. And often the Ashanti case is used as a model to say that this probably would have been what the poster child would be for the societies that lived along. Unfortunately, the advent of colonialism truncated that process. What colonialism did after the Berlin Conference was to divide Africa among different European powers. That division did not take into account pre-existing ethnic boundaries or pre-existing ethnic affinities. Basically, people sat in Berlin and decided that I will take this portion, you take that portion. So you have a situation where people living across the borders of today Ghana, Togo, Nigeria, Benin, Kenya, and so on and so forth, are divided along even family lines. There are families in Togo who are Ewe, there are families in Ghana who are Ewe. There are families in Burkina Faso who are Akans, there are families in Ghana who are Akans, and it cuts across. Now, what that meant was that what we are calling Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, and so on and so forth today, it is not your true nation states as exists in Europe and North America, if you care to. What we have is a constellation of several ethnic nations that have been forced together. And the reason that is problematic is that prior to their being forced together, they all have their own systems of governance. They have their own values. They have their own arrangements. They have their own mechanisms of conflict resolution and so on and so forth. Without any regard to all that, you lump them together. So why did they stay together during the colonial era? Because there was a supreme force that compelled them to live together. And you know about the principle of indirect rule that was used by the colonial administration as far as the British were concerned. Get the chiefs and pretend you are ruling through them, but give them orders and reduce the chiefs to stooges and let them take your message to town. In the case of the French colonial powers, they practiced what we call assimilation. That was creating a certain elite group out of the indigenous people. Now, come the 1950s, or maybe 40s into the 50s, nationalism emerged within the African continent, led largely by, and I'm talking about modern nationalism, largely by, the Nkrumahs and, Nyereres and so on and so forth. That kind of nationalism galvanized the people along the borders that were created out of the Berlin Conference, largely because they saw the colonial authorities as the primary oppressor. Over time, in the case of Ghana in 1957, the colonial authorities gave up and left. But soon after they left, soon after the common enemy left, the different ethnic nations that exist in these territories began to realize that some time ago we were ourselves. Now what do we do? What is instructive in this is that the early post-colonial nationalists in Africa were very much aware of this problem. If you look at the literature on Nkrumah's governance, Kenneth Kaunda, Julius Nyerere, and so on and so forth, they were very much aware that this is a primary problem that could virtually lead to disintegration. And if you care to know, in the period leading to independence, the arguments in the various territories themselves, there were sides that suggest that people really wanted the new social contracts to revert to what existed before. And there were those like the Nkrumahs and others who felt like independence and the nationalism on which it ruled to power ushered in a new social contract. So we must go with that social contract. Automatically, it brings in a certain tension between modern political authority and then the pre-colonial political authority, which is the chiefs. So for early post-colonial nationalists, their agenda was far beyond just economic transformation. They had a purposive agenda towards nation building. And that purposive agenda revolved around primary public policies that provide for the basic needs of the people. So you realize that Nyerere, Kwame Nkrumah, and others were very much interested in pushing out programs that universalize provision. Okay, education,
certainly
healthcare.
Deep and rich, historical perspective. But can we narrow down to Chereponi now?
Yes, I'm coming
and
there.
answer the question as to where we are failing.
Sure, I'm coming there. I just wanted to make sure that I give a certain background to give us an understanding of where we are coming from. Now, so with universalized provision, in the whole of the First Republic, all the way down, you hear very little about these conflicts because of the kinds of public policies that were enacted and implemented very actively. And people were actively encouraged to mingle. The strategy of the early nationalists was to ensure that people who inhabit modern-day Ghana have a new identity that is over and above their primary ethnic identity. So you want to be seen more as a Ghanaian before maybe a Kokumba or an Anumba or an Ewe or a Gan or whatever the case may be. And so they were using public policies to push that particular philosophy very strongly. Unfortunately, somewhere along the line, following the departure of many of these nationalists from power and then the emergence of individualistic public policy philosophies in the 80s, the state appeared to have reneged on its ability to actually keep an eye on the ball. In Europe and North America, you could pursue economic, transformation, and you are fine. In the case of many African countries, nation building must continue to be a primary purpose, and it is not in opposition to economic transformation. They can work hand in hand. Now, coming to Chereponi, therefore, this is what the problem is. We have failed as a nation over the years to realize that the country Ghana, for which we have nice constitution, nice state institutions, run elections and everything, is not a country of homogeneous individuals or citizens. More often than not, when you meet somebody and you ask him, where do you come from? They will tell you their ethnic group first, before they will even tell you whether they are Ghanaian or not. In the 60s, opinion polls research suggests that people were more Ghanaian. People actually talk of themselves as Ghanaian before they would talk about their. Recent polls from Afrobarometer in most of the sub-Saharan African countries shows that people's identity, and that's the word, identity, is divided between being, let's say, a Ghanaian or a Kenyan and their ethnic identity. And that is where this problem really is. So it raises fundamental questions about, one, the quality of the content of public policies that we pursue as a society, and the extent to which we place human dignity as well as the ability to continue to bring people together at the heart of our public policy programs. The recent conflicts actually raise more questions about, again, the intelligence of our society. And now I'm coming back to your original question of the BNI. I think that the BNI does not report to individuals. The BNI reports to their political masters. So to be fair to them, it may well be that the BNI may have been doing, their work. And I'm sure that if you have friends in the BNI, they will tell you that, well, we give all the information that there is to give.
Same place.
After they have given the information, somebody needs to act on it. And I think that if you are in a political authority, or you are a political authority, or you are in public office that has something to do with security, and the intelligence that you require to act on things is not coming, it is up to you to demand for that particular intelligence. So it raises a fundamental question of, are we getting the intelligence and are we making good use of it? Are we analyzing it and making good use of it? I would have thought that the science would have been on the wall, and you don't even need the deep-seated intelligence analysis to know. As has been indicated earlier on, when these things are beginning to simmer and happen, teachers begin to move out, nurses begin to move out, people who do not belong there or are working there begin to move out. Did we pick this intelligence, and what did we do with it? And I think that we need both a short-term and a very, very, very long-term strategy to deal with this.
Okay.
Presently, to the extent that lives are being lost, I think it is very unfortunate. And the government has the primary responsibility for the security of all of us. What is happening in Chereponi may be far up north, But it raises questions about our collective security and safety. And we shouldn't wait for it to escalate.
So when I return to you in some 2 minutes, you summarize your solutions, what sticks out for you that ought to be done immediate and in the long term. Now, Kuku, you know, as it's being pointed out, failure in intelligence would normally be blamed. We would also look at our security institutions and say they are failing. But the buck stops with the president. He's the commander-in-chief. We never really put the blame at the doorstep of our presidents, who are the commander-in-chief. Anytime these matters come up, we isolate them, you know, and blame the indigenes and perhaps some security, and the matter stops there.
Well, interesting. You sent me somewhere, and I like the way Dr. Pesa White also tried a historical thing. You're not talking of blame, allocation of blame. Let me take you back to a speech delivered by Mr. Rollins.
Can you zoom your camera to the piece of document he's going to read from? It needs help.
The document has suffered, but this is somewhere early January 1982. And I'll read it before I explain. It says the objective of national defense includes the ensuring of national unity, which began to be threatened not only by tribal campaigns sponsored by the government, that's the Liman administration, but also by the total ineffectiveness of the former government to curb tribal strifes of the kind that took thousands of lives in the Nanumba-Kokomba conflict, as well as in a number of other similar outbreaks. In the Third Republic, there was a Nanumba-Kokomba war of a sort. I'm sure Kenna will know better than I do. Thousands of lives were lost.
He referred to that.
Yes. Now, yes. And I have the parliamentary Hansard here. This is May 7th, 1981. One S.U. Dalafu, he was a member of parliament for Saboba. He made a statement on it in parliament. All sides contributed to it. The Rawlings quote was blaming the government, the central authority, in this case President Liman. And indeed he was using that to rationalize and justify the coup. Incidentally, 1994, under Mr. Rawlings' own watch, a more explosive war occurred there. Dr. Chambers made a statement on it. Here, I have a copy. February 9th, 1994. The most significant statement in Parliament was made by the Defense Minister, Alhaji Idrisu, Mahama Idrisu, titled Violence in Northern Ghana. Incidentally, Dr. Chambers' one was titled Violence in Northern Ghana. The Dalifu one was War between Nanumbas and Kokombas. Apparently, all in the same geographic zone. Dr. Chambers, the Defense Minister, gave statistics in terms of the scale of destruction. He made a point about, Mr. Speaker, the total number of villages destroyed in all the districts is 322. The breakdown is as follows. Tamale Municipality, 33. Yendi District, 63. Nanumba District, 80. East Gonja District, 64. Sabawa Chereponi District, 17. Zabzugu Tatali District, 11. Gushegu stroke Karaga District, 54. And said the total number of 358 persons has been registered as displaced people and provided ration cards as yesterday. Out of this number, 150 were registered in the northern region, 8,953 registered in the Brong-Ahafo region, 18,626 in the Volta region, and 799 in the Upper East region. It cuts across even the regions. The impact.
Sometimes it spills into Accra and urban.
Exactly. That's where the Konkomba market. That 1994, the police seized arms from the market under the cover of selling yams. They were actually supplying guns and ammunition for the fight up north. But look, the expenditure that the Minister of Defense gave then, 1994, it was then known as Operation Gongo.
Yeah. 4 or 5.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, you will know that I'm a bit limited there. But it says 5,53,515,270 cedis, 48 pesos. He gives the breakdown, each category, but that's the total. He tells you of schools that had been abandoned and destroyed, houses and properties that have been abandoned. For lack of time, I'm not going to go into the specific details, but all the figures are here. Look, it's like a playback. Maybe today's scale is a bit low, but in terms of the impact, in terms of casualties, fatalities, injuries, people running away, teachers running away, nurses running away, health centers abandoned, it's the same picture. Maybe numbers and figures change. That's what we'll be doing. I found something interesting. Maybe this is where the Colonel's expertise will inform and educate me. The Minister of Defense made this point. He says, Mr. Speaker, the ceasefire campaigns by the media, ministers of parliament, opinion leaders, and sector commanders have assisted a great deal in bringing the situation under control. It is hoped that with the coming of the rains and the deployment of troops to sub-sector levels, the isolated incidents will be further kept to allow intense farming activities to continue. But listen here. The military has internal security responsibility for the whole country, including the northern region. Considering the fact that these ethnic conflicts in the region have become perennial, it is advisable that even though the military will hand over to the police in all areas, their traditional presence should be maintained, especially in known pivotal conflict areas, prone zones. This will afford the military the quick reaction capability in future conflict situations. The military is therefore taking measures to maintain limited presence in the following areas in order of priority. A. Priority 1, East Gonja, Yendi, and Krachi districts. B. Priority 2, Saboba district. These proposals are a temporary containing contingency. In permanent strategic terms, it is the intention of government to position a battalion permanently in the northeastern part of the country to cater for the whole area. I keep on hearing. It happens in Boko, it happens here, it happens there, and I keep on hearing people saying that why don't, and maybe I'm even maybe lack of knowledge or updated information. If it's been done, I'm sure Kenna will tell us. Whether some of these conflict-prone areas where these things are perennial, whether this information, this proposal or prescription that Alhaji Idris Mahama put forward, we have actually actualized it.
Or considered.
Yes, or even in terms of proximity, so as to give the police and military the capability in terms of quick reaction. I don't know. We're talking here of intelligence failure. There's an element of that there. True. But assuming the intelligence failure takes place and the conflict is blowing up, how do we move in to stop? I know all these things are not long-term solutions, truly, because long-term solutions would rather require some social re-engineering in terms of economic and other matters. We all know that, but we cannot say we are waiting.
1994 proposal that you are thinking of, you are looking at, would have been part of a long-term solution.
Yes.
That's a durable solution.
Yes. But that's what I'm asking, and Kenna will provide the answer, hopefully, that perhaps it's been done in scattered manner, not in a comprehensive way. I do not want to sit here and claim, when I have no knowledge, that nothing at all was done over the period. It would be unfair to the appropriate authorities. But those who know must come and give us the information as to, okay, look, this is the level at which we did things. Perhaps it's now proving to be inadequate. That is a more constructive way of looking at the issue.
Okay. Now, let's now begin to zero in on the solutions and how we quickly get out of this situation and perhaps not to return.
I hope so.
Yes. But what do you see to be the most effective way to tackle it? And in the immediate solution, are there claims about the defense minister, belonging to one of the ethnic groups, and therefore perceptions are important, so he should step aside? Are these all important?
Thanks. Let me quickly throw some light on the last remarks by Uncle Kweku. It's in the book that you brought.
Oh,
but there was a skeleton military presence of a reinforced company from 6th Infantry Battalion that was maintained at Tamale, Yendi, Pusiga, Bimbila, Salaga, Pandai, Ulensi, and Nyakpayili. In addition, there was an element of 64 Infantry Regiment at Ketikrachi. Then the police came in stronger numbers or larger numbers when the military thinned out. And in the book, I had said that up to the time that I was writing this book, in November 1999, those elements were still in place.
Okay.
So for about 5 years after the conflict, they were there. The question is, when did we leave?
Good
Apparently, the changes in administrations and new focuses and so on and so forth gave us new priorities. And in the long run, we're paying for it. The other point, I've been watching the media, from the comfort of my home, and I've heard the different debates. But let's use the theoretical basis for this argument. The Minister of Defense, Konkomba, doesn't lose the identity of being a Kokomba or Konkomba. And therefore, in this conflict, largely or nominally, as a Minister of Defense, he wouldn't have issues with the Dagmon Gonja and the Nanumba. But in the context of this conflict, the other side will invariably, attach him to one side.
But he was able to go there and get all other leaders from various sides to go there and to try to begin to speak to them, meaning he has influence, he has the respect, and his participation may be integral.
Yes. You see, I've had occasion also to comment on this. When former President Rawlings visited the conflict area on the 11th of February, 1994, that very day, the Kokombes ambushed a military truck. And indeed, out of reference to the armed forces, I need to put it on record that we lost one officer.
Yeah.
And we lost about 4 other ranks, including one corporal. You see, the officer was Second Lieutenant Agbanyo. The day that President Rawlings was in the area was the day the Kokombes ambushed the military, platoon unit. We know that the president went there. He went close to Yendi. Yendi is virtually in the conflict zone. What happened? He made all the appeals. The conflict did not terminate. So the minister's call is well intended. The calls by everybody is well intended. But in mediation, the perceptions that the parties attach to the third actors and so on is very, very important. And there are many, indeed, in the 1994 episode, it was a member of the Council of State, Okumenini, Dr. Obriyeboa Futuakwa. He was the head of the 7-member or 5-member permanent negotiating team. Why did the government find it necessary to find a civilian, scholar, traditional leader, very remote from the region? So I would want to support the calls for the minister not to be in the lead of the political mediation. For us as a people to find somebody else who can appeal, you know, in a balanced way to the parties.
Yes.
Now, for long-term solutions, I want to be very broad. First of all, we need a national security strategy for the entire country. And the Kokomba Nanumba conflict, Yendi skin, whatever it is, chieftaincy, whatever, will be a subset of...
Are you saying we don't have such a strategy?
I don't think it exists. I don't think we have. And I can, for instance, based on best practice, the curfew is fine. Probably a state of emergency, localized, might have worked. We could look at that. The presence of the security forces, to the best of my knowledge, probably is not sufficient. And I have official records to suggest that. They are not well resourced. They lack fuel, they lack the numbers to start with, and so on. And they are relying on the assembly, and the assembly is now indebted to private filling stations and so on. You know, we need to make sure that the deployment is, you know, credible. Secondly, we need some peace building. In fact, we need peace building. We have mentioned socio-economic. We need political reforms. It's a very delicate matter. But help me to pronounce this term that the Kokombes use, upapampuru or something. They want this, some irredentist, you know, idea that they want their own paramountcy.
That's right.
And they have put it on record and given examples as to how almost everybody in that area have become a paramountcy, except the Kokombes. So can we begin, and it's one of the root causes, because in the papers that you gave us, paramountcy is a pathway to access to political power. With the paramountcy you get on the regional traditional council or council of chiefs, then you get access to the national council of chiefs, then you get access to parliament, then you get recognition by the political actors, as you would know.
Right.
We need to look at that. Civic, cultural education, I don't see much. And of course, NCC will come and tell us that they are not well resourced. Now, there must be justice. In fact, if I had time to read to you what the British did to that 1940 episode, including the Supreme Court, which ordered that all the cattle belonging to Kokombes must be seized and given to the victims of their action. You know, very drastic measures. We're not seeing that. We're just touching on the surface and so on. We need justice in order to serve, at least as a precedent. Then, of course, there must be post-conflict reconstruction and permanent security force presence.
Okay.
Then we can then talk about this mediation process, you know, to try to come to the bottom of the conflict.
All right. Now we have an institution, the Peace Council. Should they be leading a mediation process?
Well, I have a list here. We can choose from any of them, but the Council of State, National Peace Council, the Ministry of Chieftaincy and Religious Affairs, Ministry of Interior, Ministry of Defense, civil society organizations, religious or Catholics and Christian Council and Muslim Council and so on.
Okay.
Then, of course, as usual, the centers of excellence of policy. Politicians must not think that they are the best actors to resolve issues of national security.
Thank you. Kofi, so briefly, solutions, what should we look at? And he pointed to one thing also, the religious. When you get to these areas, you would find a dominant population of Muslims and Catholics.
So that should be part of the solution, because people tend to listen to their religious leaders. But I have a few suggestions. One, I think it is reasonable to make the positions of the Northern Region Minister, the Minister of Defense, and the BNI director, okay, contingent on this issue. What I mean is this. If I'm president, I'll tell the Northern Region Minister that make sure this conflict doesn't erupt. Your only excuse will be that you asked for something and you did not get it. Then it happened. Because if it happens, I'm taking a resignation. The Minister of Defense, you cannot have a more important job than to make sure this does not happen. The BNI director. So these three people continue to keep their eyes on this. We've shown here on this
BNI director, you've left the national security outfits.
Actually, I mean the national security minister and who all those ones are.
Who are now interested in the political by-elections rather than Chereponi.
And for me, I think people protect their positions. So it will have an effect if they know, if this thing erupts, I'm out. The Minister of Defense, Dominic Nitiwo, I commend him. I disagree with those who say because he's Kokomba, he shouldn't have stepped forth to do anything. He has a job. His job transcends his tribe. Now, when something happens, one, I have criticized his office for not preventing this and all the security system. But once it happened, I think when we keep telling people that they should act objectively, dispassionately, it was proper for him to go and speak to his people. I think it would have been worse if he had recused himself and said that because they are my people, I'm not going to talk to them. He did his job and that was right. However, like Chief here is saying, he is not supposed to be or will not be an effective part of the durable solution going forward.
Okay.
I think we must do that disaggregation.
I think he concedes on that point.
Yes. So this whole bashing about his Kokomba, so I think it is a good thing. And Dominic, I commend you for going there, speaking to your people and telling them stop this.
Okay.
But let's have, like Chief is saying, you know, people with better information putting a durable solution. Last point, please. The history of this thing informs us that we need to have a permanent security presence there. We can't go and leave like we've done in the past.
Thank you. And Dr. Professor White, you were just about getting into the solutions, you know, long-term and short-term when I cut into your presentation.
Yes, and I think that Colonel appeared to have taken quite a number of them out. But I think that one of the major solutions is we have to turn attention to livelihoods. Because the issues of identity difference had always remained. But the trigger is always issues around livelihood. I mean, we've heard about land, we've heard about firewood, we've heard about, I mean, so many other things, and they all border down on livelihood. What it therefore means is that there is a way in which poverty has a backward linkage to this particular problem. And so is it possible that governments would turn special attention? Because when people have their livelihoods well sorted out, it is very unlikely that they will, I mean, pick up arms and engage in the kind of conflicts we've been seeing. The other thing is, I mean, I actually tend to think that, yes, the Minister of Defense may not have had a direct involvement or may not be in any way, maybe he may have been taken by surprise or whatever. But I think that politics is as much perception as it is a reality also. The fact that he comes from one of the parties to this conflict, if he cannot recuse himself, I think the government would do the mediation and the resolution process a lot of good by reassigning him. Because for as long as the perception is there that the man who sits on top of security, especially the military in this country, comes from one of the parties, the other group actually feels like we are actually just at the mercy of a button. And I think that feeling, I mean, this idea that, well, it was good that he went there to talk to them and all those things. If you ever work in political office, it's so easy to marshal all the forces and actually move into a place that you can call an enemy terrain and talk and leave because you are protected.
Colonel Festus Abuaji spoke about the need for justice. We have women, we have children, families who have lost their homes, who have lost their property, you know. And as we are told, normally those who are behind these, you know, things, once the people begin to flee, then they return, knowing that there will be nobody, there will be cattle that are scattered, there will be sheep, there will be goats. They just go for them.
That's booty of war.
Yeah. What should happen immediately to some of these who would need assistance to re-erect, you know, their homes that have been destroyed?
Well, first of all, let me say that we need to also reevaluate the deployments to the area, because a lot of what we pick from colleagues who are there and from the news media and everything is that, one, the security presence there is very, very weak. It's not as strong as you would have seen in, let's say, Ayawaso by-election. I mean, it's very, very weak. And so we need to beef up, I mean, security.
Yeah, I think there was one who said by the time they get there, they've killed them.
Absolutely.
They've been slaughtered.
And quite a number of them also there appear to be poorly resourced or have no resources whatsoever. So, I mean, if you're a police officer and things are happening and you feel like you are no resource to do anything, you may probably look for your cover yourself. So that must be one of the primary. You need to contain the situation. Once you contain the situation, then you can provide a certain access for mediation and resolution. I think that is very important.
Now, I was listening to one of them speak, and they suggested that even the curfew and extending it to them to go to bed early and wake up, you know, so late in the day is actually harming their enemy to slaughter them the more, because they come burning their homes. Once they go inside, they cannot monitor who is coming. All they would see is that they've been burnt. And so they don't even actually agree to the curfew that gets them
enforced.
Go to bed too early.
Well, I find that's an intriguing proposition, because curfew comes with a certain level of security management presence.
It should, does it?
Doesn't it necessarily follow
enforcement?
Yes. So perhaps
Kofi said it should.
There's a difference between the pronouncement
so we are talking
and enforcing
here, if we impose a curfew, there's some security presence. We may be talking of the scale. Maybe it's not sufficient. But you cannot impose curfew or a state of emergency and there's no security presence.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you, but I heard one of the persons saying that it seems that one faction breaches the curfew and they who are observing it are left
So
vulnerable.
the problem is
that's where
with the security presence.
The enforcement of the curfew
Yes,
across board.
then there's a problem there.
And motorbikes.
Somebody just sent me a text. It's not really my point, but he asked me a question. He says questions must be asked of soldiers who come from the conflict zones and take their leave some few months before these conflicts start. What is the correlation between their leave period and the conflicts? I don't know if Colonels with his expertise can help me, but I find it very intriguing. I never thought of that. But the mediation thing, the 81 statement by Mr. S.U. Dalafu.
But isn't this thing far-fetched? How is that going to be such a coordinated fashion?
No, maybe that's just for intelligence.
That soldiers who are there are taking their leave.
It's an issue for intelligence analysis. That's the way I see it. But the mediation, this Mr. Dalafu, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the name well. In terms of mediation, fighting between Anambas and Kokombas.
This is a Hansard for?
This is May 7th, 1981.
Okay.
And he says, my second appeal goes to the government. I think that the settlement of a conflict of this nature requires difficult and intricate negotiations. The mediators in such a task must be impartial, respectable, and acceptable to both parties. I mean men like religious leaders and enlightened traditional rulers. I am therefore appealing to the government to secure the services of such a mediating team to resolve the conflict between the Nanumbas and the Kokombas in the Nanuma district. The government should also consider paying compensation to those who have lost their properties and rehabilitate and resettle those who have been rendered homeless. That principle of mediation, if it's the full-scale mediation, yes, neutrality, impartiality, and all those things are important. But in the context of the current defense minister, and you see, I would agree if there is a comprehensive peace mediation process underway, I would agree that he ought not to be part of that. I would agree. But I'm not sure we can begin to ask for reassignment of the minister from the portfolio of defense because of this conflict. I'm not sure about that. I don't think that's a very sustainable proposition to make. If it is his physical presence in the place in terms of mediation that we want to curb, fine. For good reason, not because he's a bad person or he's actually selfish or not neutral, not because, but the perception. So that's fine.
Okay.
But his position as defense minister, ought not to be contested because of this conflict there. That is his commitment to the job he's doing. Ought not to be. Now we all agree.
Will it also be required of the MP for the area that when they are doing this mediation process, he should not be involved?
Is that not a good question? Because he's a member of parliament.
That's the MP for the area, and you will expect that he will have some influence there. Nitiwul is MP for Bimbila, far away from that place, but because of the fact that he belongs to one of the ethnic groups. So,
well, I think that the MP should.
It's a fantastic point
to contextualize it properly. If Nitiwul was Minister for Education, I mean, gender, whatever, I don't think this issue would have been an issue.
Okay.
No, Nitiwul is a Minister of Defense, a cardinal institution in the issues of conflict, safety, peace, and security of this country. The perception out there is that defense has a certain monopoly over weapons. Nitiwul may not be involved in this thing at all. But people may just assume that by being one of the parties to this conflict, there is the potential that directly or indirectly there is a permissive act.
All right.
No, I think that we need to wipe out the perception.
Who have spoken
but that's why,
and favored taking a back seat somewhat and not be part of the process going forward, including Dr. Kwesi Enin and co. They say it's a question of perception and not a question of reality. And that in mediation, this is important.
Yes,
finish your solutions.
But to proceed from that seemingly correct premise and say that because of that he should be reassigned, that is removed as a deputy, as a minister of defense, I say it's a wrong and faulty conclusion.
Removal would disrupt that office.
It's a faulty conclusion.
Office functioning right
it's
now.
A faulty conclusion.
I see.
But you see,
one of your friends, very respected persons in the Republic, says that, and I will not disclose their name, says that I think the call for the defense minister to step aside is well intended. I would rather suggest the president does a reshuffle and give him a similar high-profile cabinet position. If he is removed entirely, that would cause resentment among the concumbers with long-term consequences.
See, if we had evidence that the military deployment, those who have been deployed there, are actually misbehaving and have taken sides, you might then want to draw a line that perhaps because the Minister of Defense is a cucumber, he's engineering something there. It's so unfair.
All right.
And quick, what has he done?
Sorry, Kuku finish and we take a break. We return to a brief moment with the PDS and Krobos. And then we'll take our most important break and return to deal with the financial sector.
I was going to end on the Colonel's book. Apparently I had missed, I've read the book very well over the years. A long time I went back to it. But I missed that point about some...
Well, he pointed you back
to those measures. Now we need to find out the status. If they have been revised, they need to be reinstated but reinforced in a more comprehensive manner.
Right.
Okay? That is a very key thing.
Okay.
My quick take on this is, fortunately, the task force commander, then Brigadier General J.H. Smith.
Yes, that's right.
Who became Minister of Defense, is still alive. In situations like this, instead of knocking your head or throwing your arms blindly, call people who have knowledge of the practical issues.
Yeah, I agree.
And consult with them for some ideas.
Sure. And the thing you said about this paramountcy and the
let's hold on briefly before I take my break at this point. Let me bring in senior lawyer, respected one, Yoni Kolendi, who wants to make a brief point on this. He has a good idea of the terrain and the circumstances in the place. Yes, Yoni, good morning and thank you for joining us on Newsfile.
Good morning, Samson, and good morning to the panel and your listeners. Now, I'm just concerned to make this point in relation to calls for the Minister of Defense to be reassigned or removed or step aside, whatever the rendition, on the basis that he is a concumber. Now, And the strongest reason I have heard listening to all your panelists across the board is the perception. Now, we're building a country. We're trying to build a national identity of the Ghanaian. In so doing, national policy, big decisions must progressively move away de-ethnization of the Ghanaian instead of decisions and choices based on perception, which will reinforce our endorsement of tribalism and ethnization. Now, if you said you were removing a minister because there's a conflict involving a broad tribe of people to which he's affiliated, what are we saying? That if there's a problem, let's imagine it, involving Achims and another tribe, we'll remove the president? Or if there's a problem involving the army commander's ethnic group, let's be uninformed people. And something I'm concerned because your program is a program where we take the matters to another level. If there is intelligence, if we have credible evidence that the minister or anybody for that matter, irrespective of their tribe, is acting inappropriately, unprofessionally, is exploiting the position that they hold in the scheme of things, that person gets removed. Not because of their tribal identity. Something you and I, what are our tribes? We are Ghanaians primarily, and that's how we've conducted ourselves. What is Kweku Bako's tribe? He's my brother from another mother. He's not a Dagati. We must do things that will promote our integration. The state should not reinforce this, identity crisis that we already have. Must
the history about the recent development in Dagbon, which escalated the matters there, guide us? Because we know how a section of the group there felt because of the position of one of the people who was, with one of the tribes, one of the ethnic groups.
No, Samson, I'm not privy to the exact details you're speaking to, but let me make my second point. Maybe it will help resolve the point.
I'm talking about the murder of the Yana and about 40 others of his followers at the time of his elders that we are told about. Within this period, we still know that there are deep-seated, hatred and hate, animosity on the basis of a minister at the time having connection, to one of them and being in the government.
Now, so that is what makes it bizarre when we use perceptions. I don't know if you're talking about evidence at the time that minister connected with government or in government had inappropriately leveraged his position for an ethnic interest. If that evidence is there, that's why we have intelligence. That's why we have counterintelligence.
All right. So get to your point too.
People. Now,
get to your point too. Yeah.
Samson, at the end of the day, security must be owned by the people. The only kind of security that people can trust and rely on and sign up to is one born out of themselves and people they know and people they trust and people they understand. You're not going to have any durable or enduring security situation where you send, for want of a better word, quote and unquote, strangers, make a decision, they will leave and leave the Konkombes and the Cherokees and the Nanumbes and all the different ethnic groups to coexist together.
Okay.
So if you're going to have any enduring security resolution of this matter, you need people who may well have an ethnic affiliation, but who have discharged their duties and conducted themselves in such a way that the people know that this is a trustworthy brother of ours, irrespective of the ethnic denomination.
Thank you very much, Yoni.
So if you have credible individuals, whether they are Konkombes or Cherokees or Nanumbes or anything, leveraging and acting professionally. I think that what civil society ought to do is to support and endorse those people to be part of the process.
All right.
People will
Thank
not
you.
lead in a process.
Yoni, thank you.
They are strangers.
Yoni, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And Yoni Kulendi is a lawyer, and I think many of us do not know he has some background in security. People don't know about that. Thank you very much. We'll take a break. We'll return and spend brief time on the PDS and its disagreement with the residents of Krobo, the Krobo land. And then we will take a break, resume to deal with the financial sector. We'll be right back.